the most repeated function in life is thinking. Before I ever speak, I've got to think. In fact, I might even suggest what I decide to speak is wildly influenced by my ability to think well and think quickly. So in terms of emotional intelligence, I think everything in leadership starts with how I'm doing. So one of our keynotes is to lead yourself to be able to lead others.
What's going on? This is Brett Snodgrass with the Iron Deep Podcast. I got Trent Booth on the episode with me. What's going on, Trent?
Just living the dream, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, enjoying your presence in our audience. You have so much wisdom to share with our audience about leadership. You are an executive coach, you're a speaker, and you focus on leadership, mentoring, and really emotional intelligence, which we're actually going to really dive into today. And your goal is to empower and inspire leaders, and you're doing that right now by being on this show, by coaching and consulting other leaders in the space. And so, again, thank you so much. And I'm going to kind of start this show off a little bit different. Because typically I might ask your story, your journey, but we know you've been doing this for 3 decades, inspiring leaders to rise up and to be the best versions of themselves. But I want to talk about the modern day, our modern culture. We've seen leadership throughout the history. Some names maybe I've written down: Abe Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Winston Churchill, Napoleon, maybe some modern people, Grant Cardone, Steve Jobs, famous leaders throughout history. But let's talk about today. Where do you think leadership is going, or how do you envision the evolving of leadership into the future?
What a great question. And let's just dive right into the deep end here. You know, it's interesting. Some of the names on that list I would celebrate even today, and I think that history would continue to hold them up. Other ones, we've already started to kind of, I have a beagle, and he'll tilt his head to the side and go, You know, when I read through Steve Jobs' autobiography, I was so excited to dive in and study this leader. And, you know, they say, don't meet your heroes. Because when I read through that, I'm like, this guy, I don't know if we'd be friends. If we wanted to hang out, I was like, I don't know if I'd hang out with a guy like that acts like this, you know? And unfortunately, when you read through something like that, okay, you can't deny his genius on certain levels, but would I call him a good leader? He wouldn't be one of the first guys I would point to at all. When I think about a Winston Churchill, I'm a little biased there because my grandfather was a huge Churchill fan, and Martin Luther King, and our dog's name is Lincoln, so you probably know where we fall on that one. Now, my last name is Booth, so I'll let everybody else at home figure out the math on Lincoln Booth and how that's appropriate. But all to say that where I think it's going in the future is there's much more scrutiny on leaders, and I think that's good. I think that's going to invite more accountability in a positive way. I think that's going to force leaders to act better all the time, not just when the spotlight's on, right? And not just in the boardroom, but, you know, I think there's much more scrutiny today, and that could be, that could obviously have pressure come with it, but leaders are going to be challenged more than ever to lead from within and lead well. And it can't just be a bunch of platitudes and act well in this moment, because people are tracking. And there's recordings today. You know, Napoleon wasn't wrestling back with the media scrum after the Battle of Waterloo. I mean, right. These leaders today have a much different set of circumstances that they're working with there. I think that's good. When we take it further, there's going to be more pressure to lead well. And I'm saying specifically to lead from a place of compassion. It was Tim Sanders was the first that I read on this. He wrote, Love is the Killer App. I just love this book. It was gifted to me by a friend. And he was the first one that was saying, hey, compassion is not just in vogue right now. And he wrote this over 20 years ago. I think he was really onto something. He goes, this is now part of what we do, is we need to bring our compassion to the workplace. There's no such thing as work-life balance anymore. It's like, man, you just got life. Yeah. These phones mean that work comes home, man. So no such thing as work life, home life. I just got life, and I've got to learn how to be able to manage that. So for me to bring my compassion to the workplace is going to be an emerging challenge for leadership.
No, I love that. Obviously, you know, this is a Christian show. Talk about compassion, the most compassionate of all. When Christ looked at the crowds, he had compassion upon them, right? To have compassion. So what does that look like for you? You know, you are you're always with leaders, right? You're heading, helping them set goals. You're looking at their vision, their future. But you even talked about one, not to go into too much details of it, but one, you had to, go into some different depths of their life. So how do you train people to have more compassion? What does that look like in the workplace, I guess? Just to go into the professional realm, because compassion, if like I do mission trips to Guatemala, orphans, and we, I work with the Transforming Futures. They train up orphans very easily to have compassion for an orphan. I think everyone would say, oh, someone, they didn't raise their hand to be born without a mom and a dad and raised in an orphanage or an institution like that. Very easy to have compassion. But when it comes to the workplace, how do you flex that muscle more, that compassion? What does that look like without going overboard with it, right? And let people walk all over you.
See, I think identity drives behavior. So for me, my identity is first and foremost as a son of the King. So I'm a child of God, but I'm also a sinner saved by grace. That sinner saved by grace part keeps me humble because I know I'm capable of not acting great in any given moment. I've got to really watch myself because I want to make sure I'm not hurting people, right? We used to joke, when I was leading a church, I said, rule one as a pastor, don't beat the sheep. That's job one, right? But I'm capable of that if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not engaging in that compassion before I show up. And certainly when you talk about a scenario with an orphan, that's almost easy compassion, right? Mm-hmm. However, in my experience, if I can see people as people, and when I say that my identity needs to drive that, if I'm a child of God, that means that the person that I'm interacting with right now is also a child of God. Right, whether or not they acknowledge that God or not, right? It's not my call whether I'm to treat them with compassion. If I'm going to try and get closer to my God, I want to treat them the way that He sees them, not the way that I necessarily see them. So I find when I'm centered in that way, when I'm showing up right, then I can have compassion on those that I'm working with. And you think about compassion for, let's say again, an orphan in the Dominican, and say if I'm on a missions trip, versus a coworker that I see every day. And that coworker, they have challenges. They have problems, man. Life is hard. Like even when life is good, there's usually something going on where they need some help, where they need some counsel, they need some wisdom. They just need somebody to see them. And I'm saying this, it's never been harder to get good employees right now, right? As there's reportedly 76 million baby boomers retiring and dying, and only 45 million Gen Xers. To step into that world that they frankly created requires 76 million people to drive. This is why, if you're in Indiana today, you might go to the subway and the owner's making the sandwich. That's not why she bought this today. Right? However, it's hard for her to find some way to work right now. Where I'm going with this is to the places that show true compassion, if they see their employees, compensate them fairly. I'm not even saying top dollar. I'm saying if you treat them with dignity and respect, compassion, love, you're going to retain people. You're going to attract the top talent and they'll stay. So not only is there a laborship shortage, there's a leadership shortage, Brett. It's going to be harder to keep the best and brightest or attract them in the first place. And if you've got a culture where it's known for compassion, hey, your daughter's sick, stay home today, take care of your family, we got you, right? Places that are demonstrating that type of an ethic. Hey, your husband just got transferred. We'd like to find a way to retain you. We'd like to actually keep you on and have you work remote. Compassion, right? Putting ourselves in their place, true empathy, if you will. And if we can operate like that as companies, we are going to attract better people and keep them for the long term, which, when you think about it, how expensive it is to find good talent,
so expensive
to keep somebody. I mean, so a lot of companies, for example, where's leadership going? This is one of the questions here. Well, leadership is now precious. See, in the 80s, if you didn't like somebody, you fire them and go get somebody else. That is not the case right now, right?
Yes.
We'd better treat our people well. In fact, if we look at somebody that's worked the last 5 years and we're paying $100,000, a lot of companies are saying that person's expensive. It costs us $100,000 a year. They're looking at it wrong. First of all, they cost you more than that because you've got healthcare, et cetera. It's probably closer to $600,000 you paid them over the last 5 years. That's a $500,000 asset. What a different way to perceive your company. If you're true human resources are your greatest resources in a company, you'll treat them differently. And I think compassion is only part of that.
No, I love that. I love that. It reminded me of a quick story. I belong to a roundtable group here in my hometown, and all business owners. And one of the owners said that he did a survey with all of his all of his employees, and what's one thing they wanted more of, and they all talked about mental health days. And it was funny because I have a younger guy on my team, and he had a really busy week, and Friday came and he said, I think I need to take a mental health day. And it just kind of makes me wonder, because you talk about the baby boomers, right? That generation versus the generation coming up. And that generation probably, if you would have heard mental health day, like, what? And what are you talking about?
But
that's what's coming up too.
Yeah. I walked uphill both ways in the snow with no shoes. Yeah, understood.
Suck it up.
Yeah.
But I want to get to that point again. I hadn't heard that before, even in my own organization. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. But it's starting to become, top of mind. Mental health, emotional health. And you talk a lot about this emotional intelligence. And I want to dive into that. So in your view, emotional intelligence, number one, I started to look at the history of that. There was a book written in 1995 by Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. And he said emotional intelligence is the array of skills and characteristics that drive leadership performance. So you talk a lot about emotional intelligence. I'm still a little even foggy on emotional intelligence.
Sure.
So can you talk about this? You talk about compassion. I've been hearing mental health days. Emotional intelligence. Talk about how this plays such a key in leadership and in companies.
I'm going to dive deep into EQ, or emotional intelligence, in just a moment. It is one of the things that aren't going away. If I could briefly touch on mental health for just a second, this is a thing that's here to stay. And I think part of this might even be driven by our connected, Web 2.0 world, where we're constantly connected and we're not having a chance to be alone with our thoughts. One of your guests quoted Thoreau earlier this year, right? Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Well, I think today he might say most men lead lives of desperate distraction. I'm distracted at date night by my phone. I'm distracted at the dinner table. I'm distracted. So here's one of the challenges with a mental health day. If an employee just takes that day and just avoids everything all day, everything that's causing the mental health anguish, the thorn is still there. They haven't removed the thorn. So if we give them a day and they just, blast out and don't pay attention, right? If they just avoid, that won't help them either. So even a mental health day might be good physically, but it might not have rejuvenated them. So we talk a little bit about, in leadership development, about rejuvenation is different than just straight laziness. If I just unplug and grind Ted Lasso all day, that's not going to be nearly as good as me getting a date with my wife, getting some time in the Word, reading my journal, writing in my journal. These type of things rejuvenate me. Not only do they bring me rest, I would say even the biblical concept of Sabbath, truly unplugging, the concept that shalom peace is different than just not having pain.
Right.
So how can we bring some of this into the workplace? And I'll segue here a little bit, because when we're talking about EQ, I love Goleman's stuff, but I'm a bit of a nerd that way. I love the science of it. But as soon as I start talking to the science side of EQ, people's eyes glaze over. Down. They're like, I start mentioning words like amygdala oblongata, the little walnut-sized thing in your brain.
And I'm not a big science guy either. Again, when it comes to details and even how the car runs. So I'm like, I don't care how it runs. I just want to go to the grocery store. I just want it to go.
Yeah.
That's
in other words, now what? All right. Yeah. So thanks for all the science. I know that I have a fight or flight instinct. I get it. What do I do with that is the bigger question, right? So when we start dialing in with people about EQ and emotional intelligence, here's the basic overview. I need awareness of myself. How am I feeling? What's my current emotional state, for example? And the greater degree to which I can identify that correctly, that gives me a shot, if you will, at self-regulation. So if I catch myself, for example, we have an exercise we call micro journaling, where you have an alarm go off 3 times a day and you just check in and jot down my emotional state right now. And I did it one time. I got to work. It was 9:00. My alarm goes off. What's your emotional state? I'm like, I'm frustrated. I'm like, that's crazy. Nothing happened yet. I did my devotions. I should be in a good spot, right? And then it hit me. That one guy cut me off, and I'm still bothered by that. Now, this is a scenario where once I was aware of that, I'm like, that's stupid.
Yes.
Pause and pivot into, I don't want to be frustrated anymore. And I was good immediately. Sometimes it's that simple. My friend, his mother just passed away. So if he checks in and goes, how am I feeling? Not great. Actually, I feel low today. I feel sad. That's not a pause and pivot out of sad. Mourning is appropriate there, right?
Right.
But it's also appropriate for him to go, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Well, I still got to go to work today. So I'm going to recognize that I'm below the line, maybe distrust my gut for a little bit, because I know where I can go if my gut is not in a good spot. I might be misinterpreting things, and I'm actually going to just play a little slower today. I'm going to play hurt. And that's noble, right? So I'm talking about self-regulation after becoming self-aware that gives me a shot at regulating. That's the me side of things. Now, the better that I get at the me side of things, the better shot I have at recognizing that in others. So when I go to start a business meeting, if I walk in and I read the room, which would be part of the others orientation, if the room isn't right, whatever's on my agenda doesn't matter. They won't be able to absorb it. Not only is that compassionate, I would just say that this is good, smart business. I want to be more effective as a leader, so I better read that room and see what's going on. Maybe the group needs to vent a little bit. Maybe they just need to be reminded that life is actually pretty good despite our current circumstances or challenges, and we can adjust that. Reading the room is, in other words, being aware of others and then my ability to influence them. So there's self. Am I aware? Can I self-regulate? And that's where I have more control. I certainly can't control others, but I can influence them appropriately. So if I can recognize where they're at accurately, and the better I can recognize that in myself, the better chance I've got of reading them well. That gives me a chance of influencing them well too. I used to think that the most repeated function in business was communicating. So I got very good early at like studying, listening, engaged listening, and then speaking skills or oration, giving a keynote speech from the front. And the more effective I could be, the more business that we would do. And I was wrong, because it's not the most repeated function in business. The most repeated function in life is thinking.
True. Yeah.
Before I ever speak, I've got to think. In fact, I might even suggest what I decide to speak is wildly influenced by my ability to think well and think quickly. So in terms of emotional intelligence, that all of a sudden unlocks everything in leadership. So I think everything in leadership starts with how I'm doing. So one of our keynotes is to lead yourself to be able to lead others. If you're not leading yourself well, you got no shot leading others well. So I'll come up for air here, Brett. I'm sure you got some thoughts around this or different rabbit trails that we should head down.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the leaders. So kind of self-regulating and leading yourself. You talked about maybe some different tips that you've done, micro journaling, just kind of taking an inventory of how you are feeling. One of the things that I went to bed last night and I was tense. I had was working on a project and was thinking about it. It was in my mind. My wheels were turning, and I hate going to bed like that. And I'm having trouble sleeping. And I took an inventory. And I'm like, this is not going to help me. How do I de-escalate or deregulate self-regulate these thoughts? So you talked about some tips. Let's go back to that. Micro journaling.
Micro journaling is one of those. So I would just go old school journaling in that moment. We call it the parking lot, because your beautiful brain is designed to work through that stuff. Well, some of those aren't going to be fixed before we go to bed. And my wife she really in particular, I think all of us do this, but there's a certain group of us that their brain are, the CVI, or core values index, calls them the innovators. And their brains are designed to not only solve for X, but Y, Z, and all the way back through A again, right? Because their brains are constantly working through it. How do we shut that machine off? What I recommend is that we ask ourselves different questions. So if I can write down and parking lot the things that are swarming my brain, all the things in the ether, in EQ world, they call it getting linear. You get linear two ways. You can get linear with your thoughts by writing them out, or by talking them through. So sometimes you'll call a buddy like, hey, I'm stuck. And you explain the problem. And as soon as you're done explaining, you're like, wait, I got it. The guy's like, you're welcome. He didn't do anything. He just listened. But you got linear with your thoughts and you gave your brain a chance to catch up and it works through. Sometimes your brain does solve for X in your sleep, but that's not usually great for quality sleep. So if we can parking lot those things in the journal and then end that journaling session with, what can I do now to have a great night's sleep? What can I do to turn this over? For me, journaling is prayer. So I'll be like, Father, what do you want here? While I'm worried about this, I know you're way more interested in this than I am. And if I'm trusting you, I'm asking you for shalom sleep, peace sleep tonight. What can I do to get prepared for that? Sometimes it's the hot bath. So I'm saying there's actual physical things. A little lavender apparently works great. And if I could do some things, maybe a little melatonin or something to have a better pre-sleep ritual, I've got a better shot. But I wouldn't try any of that without the journaling piece, which is to actually go through that exercise, not ignore that it's a thing, but acknowledge it's a thing, and acknowledge also that I need sleep right now and that this will be waiting for me in the morning.
Exactly.
When I get back to the parking lot.
Exactly. Obviously, you've talked about journaling, and some guys they feel like maybe they don't know how to journal. You talked about maybe asking questions. Maybe you have a prayer journal. Some people said a grateful journal. Is there a certain way that you journal where guys might just be like, yo, I checked off my box, I journaled, but it doesn't end up doing anything for them, right?
Yeah.
So,
journaling, I like to compare to eating. So there's times where I just need to have a power bar and food is fuel, baby. So I think there's times where I'm not super engaged, but this is a good book and I want to capture it for later. So even if there's not an emotional epiphany with the notes I just wrote, that matters. I know, if I'm just checking a box, I know that that's good, healthy habit, right? I don't have to feel awesome about having just brushed my teeth. I know that that's a good thing to do, right? So there's times where just journaling like that. There's times where journaling is moved by the Spirit and you're fired up, or in the depths of despair. And both, a lot of times, because those are so emotionally charged, people that do journal sometimes feel like, hey, if I don't feel that way, maybe it's not time to journal.
Right.
I'm suggesting if it's eating, that's kind of, those are extremes. Those are like banquets or a wedding, where it's like all this great food, and not every meal is that.
Right.
Some meals are power bars. Some meals are full tasting menus though. All right. So if I'm journaling for my goals or dreams for the future or dreams for my children, we've got 3 kids that are basically all adults. The youngest, the baby's graduating from high school this year. But for me to journal that through and document dreams, hopes, fears even, but put them all down so that I've got them. Then there's times where it's like, I just try to check in with self and I want to be smarter. So if I'm aware, I've got a shot. So I try to raise my awareness and self-coach, right? We'll talk more about executive coaching in a second, but I can self-coach. I can pause and say, what just happened? The analogy that I use is the Maps app on my phone. And whether I'm Google or Apple, as soon as I open up that map app, it's looking for me and it drops a blue dot that blinks, at least on my app, right? And that blue dot is where I am. And that matters because if I want to get directions to the red pin, I need to know where I'm starting from. So in journaling, I'll pause. And if you saw my journals, they would say WJH a lot of the time in the beginning of the entry. That stands for what just happened. And I laugh because I always get the question, what do you mean what just happened? Like, what just happened this morning? What just happened today? What just happened this year? And you already know the answer, Brett. The answer's yes. Yeah. Hey, wherever your brain goes, I actually trust that God is directing my brain in that moment, and I'm going to think on that timeline. So yeah, we're recording this deep into November here. It's hard to not think about in terms of the year that was 2023 and peek a little bit into 2024 because there's 2 things that you'd see in my journal. What just happened and what's going to happen. Now, as a guy, I typically need to have a qualifier with that because if I ask what just happened, I don't know about you, Brett, I typically list facts.
Right.
I've got a bunch of facts and I have to go deeper and say, well, how do I feel about these facts? Hey, we hit our sales number. Nice. Hey, we lost a client. I don't love that. Hey, but we added 3 more and I'm really excited about that. right? So I need to do both. What just happened? What's the circumstances, and how do I feel about that? If there's something that's super negative, I might need to process that. Sometimes it's a relational issue and I need to go and work through something with somebody.
Yeah.
But because I'm aware now, I've got a shot. Other times I'm like, dude, I am in an amazing spot right now. Is it possible that life has never been sweeter than right now? Now, Brett, that could have been real whether I journaled or not. But how tragic is it if it's real and I'm not even aware of it? And I don't even express gratitude to the maker, the creator that gave me a great gift in this season. You and I have both had seasons we're in the valley.
Yes.
So if you're on the mountaintop, pause and celebrate that.
Yeah.
Give some gratitude, give some thanks in all circumstances. Yes. But it's pretty awesome in that moment.
Yes.
I will say this too, what's going to happen and how do I want to feel about that? Because certain things I've got anxiety about or I'm worried about, and I don't want to feel that. So how do I want to feel about some things that are coming? I want to feel not anxious. I want to feel peace. Well, how can I get there? And that's where, again, I'm just teasing out that prayer. So in journaling, then what I'm talking about is becoming more aware. And the journal I don't have a better tool to get people more aware of what they're thinking, to capture more of those emotional snapshots. Frankly, there's a legacy piece of this, Brett, where my kids are aware that dad's got a whole shelf of journals that they'll get to look at someday. And, when you think about the warrior dad that was on a few weeks ago, Jeff Wilkerson, a legacy, like being able to hand my kids a journal where they go, Dad, I knew you were up against it there. I didn't know how much. And for me to show my work, if you will, for them to see my prayer, like I am up against it. I am toast without my God coming in and rescuing me here. And them seeing how to do life like that is so valuable because we tend to put our parents up on a pedestal. So, what I'm driving at here is the value of journaling. Then it makes us smarter. It gives us greater context. It helps us figure out where we're at ease, where we're at dis-ease, what we need to do. It gives me a better chance of lining up my new behaviors with my core values, not with how I'm feeling in the moment. And
I love that.
My margins are too tight right now for me to rely on anything. I need every advantage I can get. I don't know about you, Brett.
No, yes. And you mentioned Jeff that was on the podcast a while back, and the warrior dad, and something that he's talked about is you talked about identity. So a lot of times, here's what we do: we feel something, so we either act or don't act based on how we feel. And if you flip that around, again, we're sons of the High King. Like, we know who we are. Our identity equals our action, which then will equal typically how we feel at the end. So we need to turn it around. Identity equals action, and if you combine those, then that'll equal how you feel instead of just doing how you feel right all the time. So that's something I've been working. So you talk about journaling. You say, you know what, you just do it, and sometimes you don't feel like it or don't, but it's good for you, just like eating.
Yeah. Back in the day, I was at Bible college and I saw a tract that was describing the decision train. And it showed decision, action, and feelings were driving the train, which I think would describe most of us. So the engine was feelings. If I feel good, I'll do the right actions, and then I'll make some new decisions.
Right.
The problem with that, and here's what's great. I talk about this with secular audiences, and they love this. Feelings drive my actions. Well, what's the problem with that if that's your SOP? You cannot rely on feelings. I don't care who you are. I don't care how blessed you feel today. You're not always going to feel like this, right? There are valley moments. We cannot rely on feelings. They fade, they fleet, they float, they flit. If we're relying on feelings to drive our behaviors, we got no shot, right? We're going to fall down, right? And one of the things that Jeff was talking about was he was saying that I would describe that more of as a role, right? He's using that as identity because this is my core value. Here's what I'm going to do. Actually, I would suggest there that he's not relying on feelings to drive the train at all. He's reversed the train. His decisions, his commitments, his values then are driving those behaviors. And then guess what happens? The feelings follow.
Right.
So one of the questions I noticed you were thinking about asking today is what's a practical example of this working out? Years ago, and I'm talking way back, my wife and I, we got young kids at the time. We're trying to go see Avatar when it was big. So that's how far back we're going, right? Avatar's like such a long movie. Anyway, we have this fight, and I can't even remember what it was about, but I was upset. We had the babysitter show up, and I was upset. I was considering sending the babysitter home. And I thought to myself, I was like, dude, do not escalate this. Do not ruin date night. But I was mad and I needed to show her. So we went on date night, but I wasn't going to like it. So I didn't talk to her in the car. I walked up to the theater, I bought the ticket, but I didn't like speak to her or make eye contact. I gave her the ticket. I walked right by the popcorn, which I knew she would stop for. And I sat down by myself. What a great date night, eh? And my wife.
Sounds fun.
she finds me. She sits down. I'm like, all right, good. At least that's good. Half hour into the movie, I calmed down and like the angel and the devil on the shoulder conversation happens. Angel's going, you're ruining date night. This is not you. Right. You need to be more humble, dude.
Yeah.
The devil's going, but I'm mad. And I've earned it. I don't want to be mad.
Right.
One of those, right?
Yes.
The angel's going, dude, do not ruin this. So I held my hand out. She grabbed it. We reconciled. We were able to talk it through at California Pizza Kitchen later and reconcile.
It was a great night, I'm sure.
It was amazing. Yeah. However, if I let my feeling drive the train, I cancel date night and we miss out on that.
Yeah, right.
Completely, right?
Yeah.
And instead, this is just one microcosm of, no. I need to make sure I do the right thing, even if I don't feel like it. And frankly, when we talk about leadership, unless we're functioning that way, there's no way we can have a long-term legacy.
Right. No, that is true. That is true. No, I love that. Well, Trent, as we kind of wind back and wrap up this particular show, I know that you have been a pastor at one time in your life. You've done some different roles, but now you're actually in this role as a coach, as an executive coach. You do some speaking as well, and you're coaching up leaders. And one of the question that I would love to have for you, obviously, you're in this particular role, but even me, so I own a business, I do some ministry things, I have 4 children, trying to lead my family, wife. I just want to be a better man. I want to be a good leader. I want to grow consistently. I feel like things where I've stalled out is because I just decided not to do things that help me grow. So I want to be better. I want to grow as a leader. There's a lot of different things that I could do. Could be masterminding, could be I could go to therapy, I could go to counseling, I could meet with my pastor, or I could hire a coach. Yeah. Talk to me about this executive coaching, and what have you seen there that has really had some breakthrough to help guys get unstuck, or just to help consistently grow in their life?
I love the way you phrased that, even getting unstuck, because that is really the job description for the coach, is help them get unstuck by asking good questions. So let me take it further. A friend of mine that I'd known from a previous company starts up a new one, and he's asking me, he knows I'm the leadership development guy at Cutco still, and he goes, hey, what's the Tony Robbins seminar? What's the book? What's the workshop? What's the thing to send my people to? They have talent, but they don't have skill yet. Like they're really green. They don't have experience, and I need to ramp them up quickly because we're a startup, and I can't afford somebody that's already arrived. I said to him, what you're asking for does not exist in book or workshop form. What you're talking about is coaching, the consistency and the constancy of helping them think. Not thinking for them, not telling them what to do. It's not bringing in a consultant. This is asking good questions of basically people who are relatively healthy and whole, people who want to grow and want to go deeper. But what an amazing world when all of a sudden your employees are all entrepreneurially considering how to level up at their job. And also they've got a coach that they can talk things through. If things aren't great at home, they can talk that through with the coach too. Is a happy, healthy employee is going to get better work done. That's what the studies are saying. Don't even take our word for it. So the idea that coaching then helps those individuals in the company improve and get smarter. It's also sustainable because we're asking questions, primarily questions. And let me just delineate for a second. I say, do all those things. Meet with your pastor, pray with them about your goals. Meet with the counselor. Counseling is 80% past, 20% future. We need that. I am not done counseling. I can't wait to unpack stuff from that old ratty box and put it into a new clear bin. There's less stuff when I talk it through with a licensed therapist. Awesome. Coaching's the flip side of that. It's 80% future and only 20% past, so we've got context. Now, I would say there's a third side there, which is mentoring. Now, mentoring would require that I've got some experience in your world. So if I'm a dad, I don't have to have a lot more experience than you. If I'm a little further up the road, and I think I got a few years on you, I can ask good mentoring questions in that place. And I would say what we're doing at Veritas Leadership Group is kind of the hybrid. So pure coaching is supposed to be only questions. So if somebody presented a scenario where they're saying, hey, Brett, here's what I'm thinking. Am I crazy? That coach might then ask more questions about, well, let's talk about why you think that would be crazy.
Right.
Or what's that coming from? We don't do that. Mm-hmm. We're not doing a mind job on somebody. I'm like, Brett, not only are you not crazy, your process is good. We've worked through all the blind spots, and we've talked about what contingencies could be there if this is the wrong move. Mm-hmm. This is your plan for your goal, and it's good. Go, brother. In fact, when you start it, send me a picture. I'm going to high five you. You described a little bit of accountability, right? Mm-hmm. Part of the benefit of having a coach, yes, they're waving the pom-poms, is celebrating those wins. And for a lot of the solopreneurs that we're working with, we found a bit of a niche within independent financial advisors, anywhere from 50 to 300 million assets under management. Mm-hmm. These are usually small shops. They're usually not 20 people. They're usually under 10 for employees. But most of these brilliant financial advisors, they're not around a lot. They travel a ton. Mm-hmm. They've got money, so they can. But that means that their leadership development is stagnating usually. So what we do is we come in and we're asking good questions of all the people through the organization, really especially strengthening the integrator, the right-hand person, and the visionary. So we can get that visionary talking with her right-hand person. That's going to make them better, and the whole system improves. When you talk about breakthroughs, man, so one of the first guys I started working through was working evenings and weekends, great brother from the church, financial advisor. I think he went from about 30 million to about, I probably shouldn't report, but basically let's call it for intents and purposes, doubling in the 5 years. Went from one employee that was probably not in the right seat on the bus, if you know what I'm saying, to now he's got 4. In fact, that one employee's spun out a whole separate business with. The guy doesn't work more than 40 hours a week, lots of time with his 4 daughters. Never works evenings and weekends. It's all during the day with few exceptions at this point, and has basically quadrupled his income.
Wow.
I know. Because I've had people, because coaching's expensive. People go, they get the sticker shock. They're like, hey, what if we spend all this money on our people and they leave? I said, we're asking the wrong question. What if you don't and they stay?
It's true.
The upside opportunity here is to invest into your number one resource and make them better.
Yeah.
And the fact is that the coaching is asking them questions. Their progress that they make is theirs. Mm-hmm. So then people get curious. Well, you're still coaching some people after 5 years. What happens when you teach them everything that you've learned? First of all, I'm always reading and listening to new podcasts like Iron, Iron Deep. So I'm going deeper for myself, but also we just ask better questions of more sophisticated level, right? Yeah. Sometimes it is, all right, hey, I'm getting towards the sunsetting years. How do I transition this well?
Yeah.
How do I leave the legacy here? How do I make sure that our people are wealthy and happy and whole,
Yes.
So and the point is, I think coaching is going to be the great equalizer going forward.
Yeah. Amen. And that's the seasons are always changing. I mean, our life's changed. You go from young kids to teenagers. Now they're out. I go from a startup business to, mid-sized business. Now we have a lot of assets. What do we do with that?
Yeah.
It's always changing, and the seasons are always changing. So again, I think one of the biggest mistakes, if I can give any tip, is just when I just stopped growing, when I stopped reading, when I stopped being self-aware, and I was like, oh, I've made it. I'm going to just sit back and relax and be comfortable. And that's just not what leaders, and I don't think that's what God calls us to do.
We call it green and growing, man. Yeah. You got to be green and growing. And this is one of the challenges, again, with the coaching aspect of that. Twice a month, your employees are going to at least have 24 times this year where they pause and think. Our program has them actually journaling during the off weeks. So 4 times a month, they're pausing to pivot into what is getting them success. What does success look like? How do I level up? That consistency and constancy moves people forward. Again, anybody can go to a seminar and be fired up. Anybody can read a book and then forget it. It's the accountability combined with, co-creating what their future should look like. That's what sets coaching apart. And that's what I think you're going to see coaching continue to grow. It'll eventually probably be regulated, I would imagine, in this country even, as it continues to grow. Because there's a lot of weird out there. That's the other part.
Yeah.
Anybody right now can hang a shingle and call themselves a coach. So what we are trying to do is get more good quality Christian coaches in many cases. Other cases, they're just really wise people, and get them in front of others.
That's awesome. Well, Trent, I thank you so much for your wisdom today. There were so many things that we didn't really get to dive in, so maybe at a future date we can have you back on. You talk about relational wisdom. I want to dive into that further as well, but we're out of time today. But thank you so much for being on the Iron D podcast. Wish you the best, and I want to make sure I put your information in our show notes. What does that look like as far as someone's interested in consulting, coaching, Veritas? Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. If they go to veritasleadershipgroup.org, you'll see a way to be able to see not only more content to go a little bit deeper. There's other podcasts that I've guested on there. You can check that out and see if we are possibly a fit. There is also a link to schedule a 25-minute call with me, and that's an invitation to any of your listeners there. I would love to connect with them and just hear what they thought about this podcast. Awesome. And the sign of a great host, by the way, is that, we didn't get to all the questions you prepared today, but we went deep, and probably I would assume the ones we needed to hit. Yeah. VeritasLeadershipGroup.org is probably the best way. Trent Booth on all social media platforms, except for Snapchat. I just couldn't figure that one out, Brett. But right. Everything else, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, let's go.
All right. Sounds good. We'll definitely put that in our show notes on our YouTube channel and our website. So thanks so much, Trent, for being on the podcast today. Wish you the best, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Brett. Appreciate it.